My sons are here. They have returned from their errands across the stars. They sailed through the tides of the warp, which grow even more turbulent as the final hours of this age draw near. Just as it seemed your victory was assured, they arrived, and your slaves in the void tremble at their approach. You did not see this coming, did you? They are beyond your sight. Those of my blood who embraced the echoes of your terrible crimes and turned them against you. They are beyond your reach, and that proves you to be nothing more than a lie. You do not know everything that happens among the stars. You have broken my city's walls and spread ruin and suffering across my world. You have made the heavens bleed and poised the earth with the taint of the Neverborn. Worst of all, you have taken my people and broken their minds and bodies, drowning their souls in darkness. Everything they were, everything they could have been, you callously destroyed to make them another tool of your design. Such has ever been your way, ever since you collapsed into existence in the infernal depths of the Great Sea, a canker festering in the soul of the universe. But now, you will be judged, and you will not be forgiven. My sons have come, bearing the wrath I buried for the sake of the Imperium, the thirst for vengeance that nearly consumed me when I learned of Russ's terrible sin has passed on to them, and the work of my greatest son keeps them safe from your corruption. Even now, its great fire burns within the warp, the wrath of a Primarch cast out of his soul in seeking the vessels it requires to express itself. Sometimes, amidst the torment and divisions, I wonder what might have been if I had kept it within myself. How different would things have turned out, I wonder. Would my wrath have made me stronger? Or would it have been my undoing? Would I have been able to save my father from his terrible fate? Or would I have fallen to the lion, allowing my treacherous brother to help Guilliman in his last battle against our sire? So many doubts, so many questions. But I cannot waste what remains of my mind on what could have been, lest it consumes what is left of my will. I will cast out my fury to focus on the defenses of the throne world, to deny the enemies I fought in the webway this weakness in my armor. And now it has come back to me. It began as my wrath, but it is changed. It has evolved into a power of its own. Through the thoughts and emotions of my sons who embrace it and the echoes of the slain, others serve it across the Imperium, fueling its flames even as it strengthens them. For 10,000 years it has grown, fed by the will of those who dedicate their lives to the just punishment of the guilty, to the avenging of the dead. Every Imperial guard who looks upon a burned city and swears to slay its destroyers, every Arbites who sees a crime scene and vows to bring the criminal to justice, their oaths are unaware offerings to this power. Those who die unjustly, their last thoughts of terror and fury, leave their echoes behind. And it is through these lingering traces that the thing my wrath has become expresses itself, raising the shades of the dead to create wraiths bound to its living agents. A new power has risen, unmarred by ruin, untainted by the dread legacy of the old one's terrible failure. His name is Vindicta, the rightful retribution of the slain, and it comes for you, passing through the tides of madness, forged by 10 millennia of war, a vengeful angel empowering those who have dedicated their lives to the punishment of the guilty. Fear its judgment, for it shall show you the same mercy you show to all those you crushed underfoot. And if powers can be born, then they can also die. The Siege of Terathalion, Part 3, The Wrath of the Dead. From the warp came the heralds of Prospero, carried on winds of vengeance, drawn to the greatest concentration of Lemanros's blood in the galaxy. With them came the ghosts of the Thousand Suns' long-lost homeworld, spirits of mortals and Astartes possessed with a burning need to avenge the wrongs inflicted upon them in ages past. These raids have shielded them from even the sight of the Everwatcher, and the witches aboard the Chaos Fleet screamed as if they sensed judgment come around at last. At their head was Kion the Black, Scourge of the Wolves, and the first of the Heralds, who has led the defense of Prospero against the 6th Legion, watching his world burn around him as he fought to save his people. To the embattled Thousand Suns, these returned brothers were a miracle, but their journey to Terathalion had been far from an easy one, and even with their help, the issue of the war against Zahariel's armies remained to be decided. One thing, however, was certain. Before the end, the dead would have a chance to claim their revenge. It began with a call, a distant voice crying out to the scattered heralds of Prospero, long before Zahariel's Black Crusade entered the Prosperian dominion. Across the galaxy, the sons of Magnus, who had heeded the voices of the vengeful dead, sensed something ominous on the horizon, and the instincts that drove them to battle against the minions of chaos and the children of Rus woke once more. Within the Imperium and beyond its borders, hundreds of heralds knew that a terrible threat was rising. A new power being forged in the darkness that would be aimed at the legion they had left behind, but that they still adored. It was a pull on their consciousness, far stronger than anything they had ever felt before. Each of the heralds had walked the path leading to his status alone, hearing the call of the legion's dead homeworld until they had journeyed there and bonded with the restless spirits of Prospero's ruined cities. They had all left their brothers behind, claiming small ships as their own, navigating them through the warp through their own power, and amidst the desolation left by the burning, they had embraced the powers that had been born from Russ's betrayal, the psychic imprint left by the slaughter of billions of psychically insensitive souls. A thousand suns descended to Prospero, and the herald returned, wrapped in the ghostly shades of long-dead humans and Astartes. So it had been for 10,000 years, and during all that time the heralds had remained isolated from each other, walking their own paths, only rarely crossing one another when a particular battlefield called to several of them at once. And now they were returning to Prospero for the first time. All of them. Though the heralds of Prospero fought alone, not even they could hope to sail the galaxy for long without aid. Each had gathered a war band at his side, and those who had survived the darkness, thanks to the haunted warriors. In their errands, they had found allies, men and women who could be trusted in the long war against the slaves of chaos, and the sons of Lemanrus. Rogue traders, inquisitors, but also captains of the Imperial Navy who had willingly followed these wraith-wretched warriors. Some heralds only had a single small ship, made warp capable only through the exercise of their power. But others brought small flotillas to Prospero, with entire regiments they had rescued from the fires of war aboard. It was an eclectic mix, and only the exchange of the old 15 Legion codes kept the various elements from turning hostile against one another. The defense, left in place by the Thousand Suns, did not open fire, acknowledging these codes as well. Several weeks after the arrival of the first ship, without any special exchange, every herald suddenly descended to the planet, the call that had brought them to the system intensifying. None of them brought any of their forces with them. Whatever was about to happen, they all knew it was a matter only for the sons of Magnus. 52 heralds of Prospero returned to the world that had forged them into what they were. Their transports landing on the edge of what had once been Zika, the City of Light, capital of Prospero and center of the Thousand Suns dominion. The world reacted to the new arrivals, and as the heralds moved through the ruined streets, echoes of the city's lost glory appeared around them, the ghosts of buildings long since destroyed. But soon the images changed, showing the buildings as they had been during the burning, with half-formed specters fleeing from their destruction, hunted by red-eyed monsters in grey armor. The minds of the heralds were filled with the screams of the wounded and the dying as they retraced the path their ancestors had followed 10,000 years ago towards the pyramid of Hotep. There the Thousand Sons had made their stand against the 6th Legion, and there they had escaped the misguided judgment of Leman Rus. The wound in reality through which the survivors of Prospero had escaped remained, even after all these years, the energies of the warp leaking through it, infusing the bones of Zika and all of Prospero. Lesser minds would have shattered under the pressure, unable to cope with the suffering surrounding them. But the heralds were used to such things, their psyches inured to the screams of the lost, which they always heard in the back of their skulls, even between battles. All of them had renounced any form of peace, sacrificing even the tenuous tranquility Astartes might know in the pursuit of retribution. The ghosts of Prospero only strengthened their resolve, and they came together before the ruined pyramid, emerging from the illusion-wretched Zika one by one. Then, from the spectral mist came the first and greatest of them, Kion, the Black, Scourge of the Wolves. All present recognized him, and the 51 heralds bent the knees before the warlord who had led to the doomed defenses of the world on which they stood. Here was a living legend from the Legion's distant past, rooted in the same ghostly fires that raged through the devastated city. Iskadar Canyon had vanished after the scouring, when the rubric had been cast and the 15th Legion had all but been destroyed by its unintended effects on those not strong enough to bear it. Since then, he had never been seen by any Imperial, and the Thousand Sons themselves thought him long dead. But when the black-clad legionnaire entered the circle of his younger brothers, none doubted his identity for a moment. His armor, blackened by the fires of Prospero's burning, his axe, bearing the mark of the wolf that he had claimed from the last champion of the 6th Legion he had killed before leaving Prospero, and the aura of ghosts that surrounded him, thicker than any other heralds. All were incontrovertible proofs of who and what he was. For 10 millennia, Canyon had wandered the galaxy aboard his starship, the Thylock, fighting beyond the borders of the Imperium against threats both new and ancient. The Xenos enemies whose very existence had been forgotten amidst the heresy's destruction. He had hunted the traces of Russ's folly, these disturbed Xenos worlds where the Wolf King had awakened horrors that predated the rise of mankind. Though the Imperium would never know of his deeds, Canyon had prevented countless atrocities over the centuries. He had been spared even the slow aging of the Astartes, preserved by the same power that flowed around the heralds, and baited all of Prospero. Like them, he had been called here without knowing why, unable to resist the pull of his lost homeworld. And like them, he had many questions and precious few answers. But before he could do anything, a terrible vision fell upon the assembled heralds of Prospero, brought to them by the power that had gathered them, Vindicta, the warp entity that had grown from the wrath of Magnus. For thousands of years he had slumbered, empowering the strange abilities of the heralds, and perhaps others fighting against chaos and the wolves. But now, as the Dark Millennium came to a close, and the enemies of the 15th Legion rose to destroy it once and for all, it was awakening, roused by the echoes of a potential future that must be averted, no matter the cost. They saw madness. They saw the fortress of Ahat Yakabi torn down, its walls breached by armies of demons and chaos marines. They saw their slumbering Primarch slain, his body torn bloody pieces by the claws of the greater demon that had plagued their legion for 10,000 years. They saw Zahariel use the defiled remains of their Gene-sire to weave a vile spell, preventing their rubric and turning it against the Thousand Suns, wiping out every living scion of Magnus in the galaxy. They saw the Ashen Dead, these brothers who had not survived the Rubik's power, enslaved by the cruel will of the Everwatcher, waging war against the Imperium side by side with infernal horrors. Their armors had been defaced with symbols of Tzeentch, and they wielded new sorcery-infused weapons of terrible power, while the souls trapped within were forced to do the binding of the Changer of Ways. They saw Terathalion burn and crack, the planet unable to bear the strain of the atrocities committed upon its soil as the 15 cities were lost to the depredations of the ruinous powers. And they saw the Prosperian Dominion fall to the armies of Tzeentch, brought low by the Black Crusade unleashed by the Chaos God of Change to fulfill his ancient vow to destroy the Thousand Suns. Library worlds set ablaze, billions made playthings for the Neverborn, a kingdom of the damned and their victims to suffer in the fires of anarchy for the rest of time. Warriors who had witnessed the darkest horrors chaos was capable of fell to their knees, weeping like children, unable to cope with the monstrosities they beheld in their mind's eye. Their screams of revulsion drowned out the sound of Prospero's own wailing, a shriek of outrage and terror and pure absolute denial. They vomited in their helmet, twitched on the ground, paralyzed by the shock, or remained eerily silent and immobile while the air around them was filled with psychic projections of their terrible anguish. Only one remained on his feet, though. Even he was shaken by what he had seen. Canyon, threw his head to the storm-filled heavens and shouted his defiance. "No, this will not be. I will not allow it. Never." The strength of his words, backed by the indomitable power of his will and his tremendous psychic might, shattered a hold of the vision on the herald's mind, allowing them to rise again. But no sooner had the words left his lips that, from all around the sons of Magnus, came a sound that every herald remembered, even if they had never heard it in their lives. The sound of wolves howling as they came to destroy Prospero. Ever since the razing of Prospero's cities by the 6th Legion at the dawn of the Roboutian Heresy, the world had been haunted by the ghosts of these slain during the fateful conflict. But the defenders of Prospero had taken a toll upon their attackers, and thousands of sons of Rus had paid with their lives for their betrayal of imperial unity. As the world was slowly suffused with the powers of the warp, the shades of these warriors had been risen as well. But the overwhelming number of the Prosperian dead had prevented them from manifesting whenever a new herald was called. However, they were still there, fiends of shadow, fang and claw, lurking in the desert and wild places, still consumed by the same blind, self-righteous rage that had driven the rout to the Thousand Suns homeworld. And now these rates had been strengthened by the fall rituals of a servant of darkness, a being that had once been mortal but had long since transcended the laws of life and death. Agasti the Necromancer, undying servant of Vulcan, the Black Dragon. Agasti the Necromancer. Centuries ago, Agasti was an inquisitor of the Ordo Sepulturum, the branch of the Inquisition whose members take it upon themselves to hunt down those who disturb the slumber of the dead. Greatest among the Order's enemies are the cults of Vulcan, and the resurrectionists who seek to break the laws of life and death. Agasti served well as an acolyte for several decades, finally earning his inquisitorial rosette when he slew the Great Defiler, an unidentified Xenos creature whose psychic abilities had turned the whole Hive City into a kingdom of the walking dead. Agasti's loyal service continued for nearly a century until his path crossed that of a cult of Vulcan known as the Arisen Dead. These debased worshippers of the Black Dragon originated from all strata of Imperial society, their minds blasted to ruin by the call of Vulcan. Each of them had undergone an unholy rebirth that transformed them into wights, retaining their faculties and gaining immense strength and resilience, at the cost of their soul. Driven by a splinter of Vulcan's immortal mind, the Arisen Dead wandered the galaxy in search of the Black Dragon's legacy. These items of power and significance scattered across the stars, and all bearing Vulcan's taint. Agasti confronted the Arisen Dead on multiple occasions, losing several of trusted acolytes, before eventually managing to corner the cult's last member on the forbidden world of Maltiros. This world had been abandoned by the Imperium during the Scouring, declared irredeemable by the then newly found Inquisition, for reasons only mentioned in the most sealed of records. The Arisen Dead had come to Maltiros, drawn by hints that one of Vulcan's relics was on the planet. Agasti and his remaining allies fought the undead in the streets of the world's greatest city, now hollow and ruined, with no sign remaining that anyone had ever lived there. Eventually, Agasti confronted the leader of the Arisen Dead, a Draconite Inquisitor who had succumbed to the empty promises of the Black Dragon more than 2,000 years ago. Agasti's final triumph over this renegade destroyed the remaining Arisen Dead, but his victory had cost him the last of his allies. Then, as he prepared to return to his orbiting ship, Agasti found a relic that had led the Arisen Dead to Maltiros. In the ruins of the governor's palace, the Inquisitor found a ring crafted by Vulcan himself during the Great Crusade and offered to Maltiros' ruler when he had bent the knee to the salamanders without fighting. Back then, when the 18 legions still served the Imperial Truth, upon Vulcan's fall to chaos and eventual ascension into a demon Primarch, the ring's connection with the Black Dragon had been enough to transform it into a dark relic, possessed by what might possibly be the first of Vulcan's own Neverborn. Maltiros' governor had been corrupted by the ring's malevolent influence, though few records remain of the exact process. When the Scouring reached the planet, nothing living remained on it except the creature the governor had become. After the Sons of Horus destroyed it, the ring was lost and the planet quarantined, lest Vulcan's evil influence spread once more. But even this was not enough in the end. Weakened by his recent battles and the loss of his friends, Agasti was unable to resist the power of the ring and claimed it for himself, unaware at the time of what he had done. Through the ring, Vulcan's influence corrupted him over the course of several years, his body wasting away along with his righteousness. By the time his peers had discovered the truth, It was too late, and Agarsti vanished along with several radical tech priests and a handful of the most dangerous prisoners of the Inquisition. He had broken out all of their cells. Through the ring's power and his knowledge of the Arisen Dead's secrets, he had become able to take control of the psychic echoes left by the dead of any ensouled being, raising hosts of ghosts and possessed corpses as he waged war against the Imperium. Through means unknown, the necromancer traveled the galaxy for centuries, seeking to prosecute Vulcan's agenda, exposing the relics of the legacy of the dragon, and weakening the wills of the Emperor's subjects to make them more easily dominated by the Black Dragon. Servants of Vulcan throughout the galaxy known of the necromancer. Agarsti has worked alongside the Salamanders on a handful of occasions, and even the infamously proud Dragon Marines give him a warrior respect, seeing him as an agent under the direct control of their demon Primarch. Vidlogs from the armor of those few champions who managed to engage Agarsti in close quarters have revealed that his armor is now hollow, all traces of his body having long since turned to dust, while his spirit remains bound to his shell of metal by the ring's power. The ring itself is still worn on his gauntlet hand, proudly displaying the snarling dragon face Vulcan sculpted in it 10,000 years ago. All attempts at destroying the ring have failed, as the demon within protects its host from damage. Agarsti himself has been defeated a handful of times, but his slavery to Vulcan will not let him rest, and he always returns from such setbacks, seeming none the worse to bear. In the closing hours of the Dark Millennium, Agarsti had been sent to Prospero by his Dread Master, tasked with destroying the Heralds of Prospero and prevent the rise of Indicta, for the Black Dragon feared that the newborn power might interfere with his own sinister goals. The nature of Prospero increased the necromancer's powers dramatically, even if the world itself loathed him and what he represented. The enslavement of even the dead into service to the Lord of the 18th Legion. How long Agarsti waited on Prospero before springing his trap, none can tell. But such was the necromancer's strength that he was able to summon the psychic echo of every fallen space wolf, along with a host of nightmares and long-dead horrors from Prospero's past. Spirits born from the uneasy dreams of tormented young psychers and abominations from the planet's distant past during Old Night manifested in the storms of sand, dust, and ash. The Sons of Magnus were still shaken by the nightmarish visions they had just experienced, but the cries of the wolves brought their focus back. Sharpened instincts pushed aside the horrors they felt, and the battle at hand drew their minds away from dread considerations. They did not know how the route's ghost had taken form, but they could sense the power that had roused them in the distance, and knew that it must be removed from Prospero's hallowed ground. With Kion leading them, they went to war, and their fury was terrible to behold. For the first time in their long and bloody history, the heralds of Prospero stood as one. Even those of these warriors who had gathered armies of followers were used to fighting alone, for few could bear to be in the presence of the wraiths they summoned on the battlefield. Yet now they were all members of the same shadowy order, all sharing in the esoteric powers the world itself had bestowed upon them. And so, at long last, the heralds fought side by side, the first taste of true brotherhood since they had heeded the call of their lost homeworld. Strategies and signals that hadn't been used in centuries were employed once more, still as fresh in their memories and the memories of the heralds as the day they had been taught in the Legion's halls. Telepathic abilities that had awakened through disuse suddenly blossomed once more, Former Athenians becoming nodes in a psychic network, binding all the heralds together, and at their side rose the ghosts of Prospero. The shades of millennia dead spire guards, Astartes, and countless civilians emerged from the shadows and mists of Zika, and drawn out and given form by the psychic power of the heralds and the ambient energies of Prospero. Wraith fought Wraith in the streets of Zika, while the heralds cut a path ahead towards the source of the wolf's return. Their weapons blazed with psychic power, ripping the etheric forms of their foes to pieces. But the necromancer's army fought back, striking with claws of hate and fangs of old judgment. Torbek Kalim, who had saved the worlds of the Aurelian cluster from destruction at the hands of a blood angel's warband, fell, his heart ripped out by the claws of something with 3 wolf-like heads and cloaked in a snow-white fur. Seth Pyros, who was the source of the legend of the Ghost Lord and the Gallows Sector, died bleeding from 100 different wounds that his enhanced physiognomy could not close up in time. Alep Euros, who had been the last to journey to Prospero and become a herald, took his own life with his bolt pistol when he was possessed by the shade of a particularly vicious wolf lord, whose spite had allowed it to retain much of its individuality through the centuries. These and others fell, but none of them stopped fighting. Their ghosts rose from their broken bodies, and they joined the battle once more, their psychic powers undiminished by their demise. The dead of Prospero and their heralds fought their way towards the city's borders, and there they found Agarsti, standing in a ritual circle etched in melted rock upon sand, dark runes glowing with ember light. Around the circle were the echoes of Prospero's ancient predators, the Psychenium, beasts that fed upon the brains of those psychically gifted. They had all been wiped out long ago, but the memory of their terror lingered, and the necromancer's spell had unwittingly brought them back. Agarsti could not control them, but neither could they cross the arcane barrier surrounding him. When they detected the herald's approach, they turned upon them. The Thousand Suns fought these ancient horrors with their blades in their fists rather than the psychic powers, just as their Primarch had done millennia ago in the confrontation that had cost him his eye. The rate of the very creature Magnus had fought was present, a towering thing of tendrils and fanged maws that Kanyan cut in twain with his axe before facing the necromancer, passing through the ritual circle unhindered, his mortal body breaking the protection it offered. Agarsti raised a spike mace inscribed with infernal runes, and the two masters of the dead came together in deadly melee combat, matching their martial skills even as their psychic powers clashed. The air around them was filled with the roar of the dead and the clashing of weapons. Throughout the centuries, Kanyan had faced many champions, too powerful to be dispatched by the ghosts he carried with him. But even he had to admit that Garsti's skills were superb. The renegade had only grown stronger since their last time Kanyan had fought him in the crystal halls of a Xenos tomb within the hollow stars. That time Agarsti had escaped him by releasing the tomb's guardians and setting them upon Kanyan. But now, there was nowhere for the necromancer to run. "You are only delaying the inevitable," declared Agastri. "The Imperium's demise can no longer be stopped. The age of mankind is over. The age of the dragon will soon begin." "Shut up," spat Kanyan, his wrath at the desecration of his homeworld overcoming his usual tempered behavior. If not for the murmuring ghosts at the back of his mind and their cold fury, he might have been completely overwhelmed and lost control to his rage. On and on they fought, while around them the armies of the dead clashed. Finally, with a great, exhausted roar, Kanyan focused his anger and dismay the attack, a division at 10,000 years of endless war, into the edge of his blade and cut his opponent's mace in two. The demonic weapon exploded in a wave of sorcerous energy that threw Agarsti to the ground, where Canyon towered above him, axe raised like an executioner of old. "The power of the dragon cannot be defied," whispered the spectral voice of Agarsti. "In the end, all will bow to him, even you, Canyon the Black, even this new power you serve." "Never," growled Canyon, before ramming Saren into the renegade's armored chest. The runes on the blade glowed as their power ate through the vile sorcery, keeping Agarsti's soul bound to the material plane, and the ring on his right hand burned with a bright orange light as the power within sought to keep its slave within its grasp. But Canyon could sense the thread of Aether chaining Agarsti's shades now, and the power that had been growing within him ever since he had returned to Prospero flared in his consciousness. Whatever. He channeled it into Saren and felt something like surprise emanate from Agarsti's withered soul. Then, gratitude and relief, as the old spell had kept him trapped in this state of undeath for so long dissolved. The armor suit of the necromancer fell to the ground, its pieces turning to dust in mere moments. The winds of Prospero quickly swept even that away, revealing the last remaining trace of the creature Vulcan had sent to the 15 Legions homeworld. The golden dragon-headed ring that had burned so bright on Agarsti's hand. Canyon bent and picked it up before raising it before his eye lenses, glaring at the reptilian visage. He could hear its voice trying to tempt him, but the chorus of Prospero's dead was much louder. "Go back to the dragon," hissed Canyon, through clenched teeth as he tightened his grip. He could sense something else, something immensely powerful and distant, speak through him, and words not his own left his lips in a terrible shout. "And give him this message. We come for him." The ring shattered in Canyon's grip, and the demon bound within was cast back into the warp to return to the dark powers that had created it and confess its failure. Tossing the pieces aside, Canyon turned and faced his brothers, who looked upon him in awed respect. "In time," he swore, "Vulcan will be brought to justice for his transgression. But a greater battle lies ahead, brothers. We have all seen what threatens our legion, our father, our Imperium." He raised Saren above his head, and the perpetual cloud cover suddenly broke. A pillar of sunlight fell upon the blade. For a moment, it seemed as if Canyon was hollowed in pure gold. "We go to Terathalion," he declared. "Now at last, we return to our legion." With Agarsti's defeat and the destruction of the ring, the rates of the Sixth Legion were banished, and the power of Prospero was allowed to flow freely at last. The strength of Vindicta flowed through the heralds of Prospero, restoring their power and healing the wounds they had taken in the battle. But nothing could be done for the 12 heralds who had fallen in battle. Returning the dead to life was beyond Vindicta's power. However, their ethereal forms remained strong, their spirits unbowed by death. They too knew what horror threatened Terathalion, and the power of Vindicta anchored them into the material plane. Baptized, the vengeful ones by Canyon, they spread across the fleet, each following one of their living brethren. Like all ghosts of dead heralds, but still fully aware and capable of clear psychic communication. The vengeful ones were not the only manifestation of Vindicta's newly awakened power. Above Prospero, the warship Tyalok, which had carried Canyon through the stars for 10,000 years, suddenly blazed with psychic power in the eyes of the fleet's navigators and astropaths. Deep within its machine heart, the Anamesis, an entity born of Canyon's own blood sister, as well as the brains of hundreds of scholars and convicted criminals, was reforged by Vindicta. The mind of Itzara Canyon, who had all but vanished amidst the chorus of Anamesis' voice over the centuries, was suddenly invigorated, her ancient psychic ability serving as a conduit for the power. 10,000 years ago, Istara had watched Prospero burn through 1,000 eyes, observing the destruction wreaked by the Space Wolves with their ships' every sensor. Now, with her damaged soul restored, her hatred for the Sixth Legion might surpass even her brothers. She took the name of Ultio, the High Gothic word for vengeance, and vowed to lead the assembled ships of the Heralds to where they were needed, to Terathalion, where the forces of chaos had gathered. I am the Anamenesis, 1,000 minds speaking as one, bound by the secrets of the Omnissiah. I am Itzara Canyon, sister to Iskadar Canyon, daughter of the sands of my murdered homeworld. I am the vengeance of Prospero, rendered into cold iron and burning plasma. I am Ultio. Transmission from Talok to the rest of the Herald's fleet in orbit and around Prospero. And so, with Talok leading the way through the tides of the warp, the fleet of the Heralds of Prospero came to Terathalion. Despite the many attempts by the Dark Gods to obstruct their journey, they were spurred onwards by the power of Prospero, the same etheric currents that had delivered the Death Guard from the White Scar's pursuit during the Roboutian Heresy. Ships were destroyed in the journey, their crews succumbing to the demonic possession, and their Gellar fields collapsing in an orgy of horror and torment. But no ship aboard which there was a herald was lost, and none haunted by the vengeful ones was even boarded by the Neverborn. Though it was difficult to tell, Canyon was fairly certain the demons were scared of his wraith brothers, and of him too, or perhaps of his sister. Despite not having any of the vengeful ones on board, the Talok crossed the Sea of Souls without any of the torments usually suffered by the ships sailing the great ocean, its crew unburdened by nightmares and madness. However, the tides themselves were cruel and violent, etheric energy clashing against the Gellar fields of the fleet without enough strength to shake the vessels from prow to stern, or with enough strength. From his position on Talok's bridge, acting as the ship's navigator in psychic communion with his sister, Canyon could sense the titanic predators lurking around the fleet, their ravenous hunger for the souls within it, and their instinctive, bestial dread for the power it contained. The fleet had entered the warp in battle formation. When it finally emerged into Terathalion's system, after what only seemed to have been days rather than months or years of travel, the arrangement had been thrown wildly out of shape by the verges of the warp. However, Canyon lost no time in re-establishing communication with his brothers across the fleet and restoring the battle formation. Reports flooded in form of OPEX crews, while the Herald's psychic senses painted them a grip picture of the situation on Terathalion. Demons walked the land, and a black crusade marched upon Hatya Kabi. Canyon recognized the psychic stench of Zahariel, whom he had witnessed in the first attack on Terathalion more than 9,000 years before. Upon hearing the creature responsible for the Primarch's slumber had returned, the fury of the Heralds of Prospero grew even further. Their psychic power radiated ahead of the fleet as it sailed towards the planet. The Black Crusade Armada was caught directly in their path, and those psychically sensible aboard were driven mad by the terrible whispers of Vindicta and the rightful retribution it promised to all servants of chaos. Nearly all slaves of Tzeentch are psychic in one way or another, and the captains of the Dark Angel ships and Zahariel's cultist wretches were terrified. with the Ever-Watcher and the nearly all Dark Angels on Terathalion, order quickly broke down, and the Chaos Armada began to dissolve as every ship attempted to run. The vessels that brought the 6th Legion and their allies to the system fared better, though several of the Xenos breed with which Logan Grimnar had forged alliances also lost all discipline. The Herald's only goal was to reinforce their brothers in Ahat Yakabi and prevent the horrible vision that they beheld on Prospero from coming to pass. But as they punched their way through the disorganized Chaos fleet, they still took the time to unleash their power upon the enemy ships. Armies of ghosts manifested within the twisted corridors of the heretic vessels, preying upon their crew and adding to the general panic. From the bridge of the word of Magnus, Lady Admiral Kia, I just couldn't help myself, saw her opportunity and immediately seized it. She rightly suspected that these new vessels had reinforcements loyal to the Golden Throne. This was a gamble, even if their identification codes proclaimed their imperial allegiance, and Vox officers called out to her, telling her they had successfully established contact with the humans aboard. But the Lady Admiral trusted in her instincts, which told her that this strange coalition could be trusted. There was nothing she could do to help in the surface war of Terathalion, but that wasn't the case in the Void. The trader fleet was falling apart, but given time and enough distance from the Heralds of Prospero, it might be able to recover. Even if it did not, and shattered into 100 different pieces, these remnants would plague the Prosperian dominion for years to come, and require an extensive campaign to purge completely. With the reports of doom and horror coming in from the rest of the galaxy, this was not something the Imperium could allow. At her command, the Terathalion fleet left the planet's orbit in battle formation, sailing through the void towards the confused Chaos ships. They were soon joined by part of the Herald's own fleet. As the Herald's armada came close to Terathalion, Opex's and psychic senses had been able to detect the unnatural storm that covered Ahat Yakabi and the surroundings. This cloud cover was impossible to cross by normal gunships and transports. The sorcerer's energies raging within would tear them to shreds. Only the psychic protection of a herald could allow a craft to reach the surface and deliver reinforcements to the besieged city. Aboard the Thylock, Canyon quickly decided which forces his brothers would lead to the planet, and commanded the rest of the fleet to turn back and aid in the destruction of the Chaos fleet. His choice was partly commanded by simple pragmatism. The forces aboard ships carrying Heralds of Prospero were given priority, but there were only so many transports a son of Magnus was confident he could shield, and so Canyon was forced to select the rest of his army on what little information he could glean from the situation planetside, as well as the best guesses of the Anamesis collective mind. The Vox transmission had video this time, and it went both ways. On the bridge of the Word of Magnus, Lady Kia looked at the screen showing her the one leading the armada that had turned away from Terathalion to sail alongside her fleet. He was human. Every Astartes in the fleet was on his way to Terathalion's surface, and handsome enough, in a roguish sort of way. He called himself William Magellan, rogue trader and sworn ally of the Heralds of Prospero, who had saved his life and those of his crew more than 50 years before, in an ambush by an ultramarine warband. She had listened to him talk for 2 minutes now, and every second of it had been a revelation that had shaken the world around her. She knew of the Heralds. One could hardly serve within the Prosperian dominion as long as she had and not hear the legends of these ghost callers. But she had never thought that they would command a fleet, let alone gather together. Then there had been the news of the Battle of Prospero, though the captain had known little of what had transpired on the 15 Legion's ancient homeworld. His Astartes masters had been tight-lipped on the subject, All he knew was that the heralds had been called to Prospero, and there they had learned of the threat faced by Terathalion and their slumbering Primarch. Then, after a brief battle against the force of chaos, they had left to come to their brother's aid. She had known the Black Crusade attacking Terathalion was something that would shape the fate of the Imperium, but this was different. Events like this belong within the legends of the heresy, of the time when the Primarch and the God Emperor himself had walked the galaxy. And yet here she was, part of one such tale in the making. She resolved that she would prove worthy of such an honor. She would not fail in her duties. Her grip tightened around the long-suffering armrests of her command throne, and she rose to her feet. On the pick screen, William fell silent. He was looking at her, and something in her expression was making him smile. "All ships at full speed," she commanded. "Align formation with our new friends. If these chaos come think they can run away after attacking our world, they have another thing coming." A cheer of pride and bloodlust rose from her crew as they moved to relay her orders, and she allowed herself a tight smile. Now the traitors would pay for what they had done. Together, Lady Admiral Kya and Rogue Trader Magellan, appointed fleet leader by Canyon himself, on the basis of his experience and courage, led the battle against the Black Crusade's fleet. With the heralds focusing their attention on shielding their transport as they descended through Terathalion's tormented atmosphere, the ghostly borders had faded, and a measure of order was returning to the heretic armada. But before those left behind by the triumvirate of Demon and Astartes could restore their control over the ships, who could still be reached by Vox and sorcery, the Imperial fleet entered range for their long-ranged weaponry. The barrage of Nova cannons and lance weapons spread confusion once more, and the Chaos fleet soon fell apart, each captain seeking to save his own skin. With a masterful four-dimensional pincer maneuver, the Imperials were able to catch and destroy more than 80% of the ships that hadn't begun to flee the moment the heralds had arrived. They took losses in the process, of course. The Word of Magnus itself was badly damaged in the engagement, and Magellan's ship, the Emperor's Compass, had to be abandoned after sustaining catastrophic damage by Logan Grimnar's own flagship as it fought its way to the Mandeville point. Magellan went down with his ship, raising a glass of priceless Amsac to the Lady Admiral over a blurry pick transmission as the bridge went into flames around him. On the planet, the three leaders of the Black Crusade received news of this new development from their sorcerers and psychers left aboard, the only form of communication that could pierce the supernatural storm roused by Zahariel's circle to shield the army's approach from orbital bombardment. Even so, with the ghosts of Prospero interfering, the witches could only transmit the most basic details. The Everwatcher was unconcerned by the fleet's fate, but Azrael and Grimnar were dismayed, afraid that they would end up trapped on Terathalion, where the full might of the Imperium would fall upon them and destroy them eventually. And the Everwatcher told them, laughing in their minds all the way, that they now had no choice but to follow him and do their very best to help him accomplish his goals. With their fleet destroyed and incoming Imperial reinforcements, only the powers of Zeech could rescue them, and the God of Change would not deliver their salvation if they failed in their unholy mission. Zahariel's plans could yet bring victory to the Black Crusade and doom the 15th Legion, if the greater demon could only reach the sanctum of Magnus and perform his vile work on the Primarch's slumbering form. Then Zahariel's promised with uncharacteristic sincerity they would hold the power to defeat all that the Imperium could throw at them, and the favor of Zeech would be theirs forevermore. Gritting their teeth, chaffing at the demon's imperious command, but irresistibly drawn to the lure of self-same promise that had convinced them to join, the Black Crusade, both Azrael and Grimnar fought their way through Ahat Yakabi. Each was leading a group of warriors from their legions, as all whom were masters of their own warbands. On the battlements of the 15th's greatest stronghold, Maddox listed the names of Russ's sons as his brothers, and the human defenders of the city recognized them. Lucas the Deceiver, who had replaced one of his hearts with the organ of some monstrous warp spawn, after the original had been lost to the clawed gaunts of a dark Eldar warlord. Leifar the Immortal, who had died 5 times and returned from each demise a little more changed by the Faustian bargain he had made back when he was still a human cultist of the 6th Legion. Aegil Ironborn, who had been born in the warp with half his body made of a living dark metal. It had not only survived, but earned ascension into the ranks of the Space Wolves. Gunnar Moonchild, whose body had long since succumbed to the curse of the Wolfen, but had retained his mind through an unholy combination of Eldritch Pacts and Xenos technology. And most dangerous of all, Ragnar Blackmane, the Young King. That Grimnar had somehow managed to get the bloodthirsty, ambitious warlord to agree to his command was a dire sign of just how determined the 6th Legion and the Dark Gods themselves were to destroy the Thousand Sons. For Grimnar and Blackmane were both devotees of the Blood God, and the champions of Khorne rarely accept to submit to the authority of another of their vile creed. It seems Tzeentch was not alone in his obsession to destroy the 15th Legion, though Khorne's hatred was motivated by the Thousand Sons' use of psychic abilities, not their refusal of submission. Members of the Corvide saw this new move in the great game of chaos and filed it away to be studied in greater details later, once more pressing concerns had been addressed with Bolter and Blade. Those of the Thousand Sons who had studied the ways of the First Legion and the course Those of the Thousand Sons who had studied the ways of the First Legion in the course of their long war against chaos were more concerned by Azrael's entourage, not by those who were present, though each had a long list of atrocities attached to his names, but by the absence of one they had expected, since learning the Lord of Lies was part of the Black Crusade. Asmodai, the self-proclaimed Lord of Redemption, and Azrael's infamous second-in-command, was absent from the Grandmaster Circle. Despite the distraction of the war at hand, these sons of Magnus wondered on what mission the Lord of Lies had dispatched his rabid hound, who was rarely seen away from his master's side. Perhaps Asmodai was dead, but they doubted it. A creature as foul as he would not go quietly into the night. It would kick and scream and drag as many as possible with it. On their way to the Thousand Sons fortress, the two Chaos Lords each slew several of the sons of Magnus, along with thousands of Ahat Yakabi's defenders. Azrael's armor was covered in sorcerous wards that kept the power of the Thousand Sons at bay, while the axe of Morkai, Grimnar's infamous demon weapon, shielded its wielder from all warp phenomena, not directly bestowed upon him by his unholy god of carnage and bloodthirst. Each of them was one of the Imperium's greatest nemesis, their names whispered as curses across hundreds of worlds. As for Zahariel, he had also continued his advance after slaying the rear guard, holding the breach in the city's outer wall. The Everwatcher had taken to the air again, instead gathering his courtier of Lords of Change nearby him. None of Ahat Yakabi's defenses could stand against so might a pack wards. None of Ahat Yakabi's defenses could stand against so might a pack wards transspurred and died, their powers broken by the twisting sorceries of Tzeentch, and all mortals who stood in their path were either hideously murdered or even more horribly transformed. However, even the greater demons feared the powers of the Wardens, and Zahariel guided his group down a labyrinthian path through the burning city, using his powers of precognition to avoid encountering any of the psychic titans. The Thousand Sons had sacrificed themselves by bounding to the god machines. The Thousand Sons who had sacrificed themselves by bonding to the god machines tried to hunt down their arch nemesis, but Zahariel always remained a step ahead, not hesitating to throw entire warbands in the way of the Titans to escape the rat himself. Yet while the lords of the Black Crusade soon reached the walls of Ahat-Yakabi's inner fortress, most of their army had lost its direction the moment they had entered the city. Traps and ambushes had separated squads of Chaos Marines from the rest of their brethren. Space Wolves packs ran rampant, the beasts within their blood pushing them forward. Many succumbed to the curse of the Wolfen that day. Their genetic instability increased by the Zechian magic saturating the air. With Zahariel's attention focused entirely on reaching the fortress, the remains of his cultist armies was lost, their leader no longer hearing the voice of their demonic master in their corrupted minds. It was this disorganized rabble that the heralds of Prospero met first when they entered Ahat-Yakabi, with Canyon the Black leading them. The heralds, the ghosts of Prospero, and the mortal armies they had gathered struck the traitor hordes like the Emperor's own righteous retribution. Mind-linked, the heralds kept their forces into one cohesive whole, an arrow aimed straight at the city's inner fortress, where they knew the Lord of the Black Crusade would be going. Fafnir Bloodbrother didn't laugh as he ripped off the head of another spire guard. Slaughter had long since lost its appeal to him. He missed the joy of battle, just like he missed the members of his old pack. Those who now followed him into war were young compared to him. They had not tasted the ashes of Prospero, not spilled the blood of innocence in the Wolf King's name. They reveled in this war, in this chance to bring death and ruin to the hated witches of the 15th Legion. Blind fools, all of them. Fafnir despised them. For all that they shared his blood, they were not true wolves. They were curs, rabid dogs descended from a line that had once been noble, but was now corrupted beyond salvation by inferno and alien influences. And they were tearing a bloody path throughout Ahat-Yakabi, fighting against the humans who stood their ground even before such monsters as the Rout's warriors had become Fafnir's himself. Even before such monsters as the Rout's warriors had become. Fafnir himself had killed dozens, including several of these female witches who wielded the power of the weird against their foes. Their skills, honed as they were, could not pierce the runes marking Fafnir's armor. Wards first laid down thousands of years ago by one of the 6th Legion's greatest rune priests. Nothing, it seemed, could stand in their way as long as they kept out of the way of the Titans fighting amidst the ruined city. Of course. But then, cousins, shouted a voice great and terrible. We are returned. He knew that voice. He had heard it before, first laughing in the time before madness and sorrow, then cursing him and all his kind with hatred colder than Fenris's own winters when they had fought against the All-Father after the Wolf King had called him false. But it was impossible for him to be here. It was impossible that he would come for them now, after so long. Yet here he was, and his armor blackened by the fires that had burned his homeworld, holding the axe he had taken from the champion he had slain. He was here, and death followed with him. The wraiths hit Fafnir's pack and tore them to shreds, the young blood screaming as he finally learned the meaning of terror. Only Fafnir remained, his warded armor protecting him even from the wrath of Prospero's dead. He stood, numb, watching as Iskandar Canyon walked towards him. Fafnir could smell the power radiating from the other Astartes. Never before had he seen the likes of it, at least not within a being of flesh and blood. "Canyon," he called out, "you have changed." "So have you, Fafnir," replied the Scourge of the Wolves. "I have become Vindicta's voice, and you. What has become of you, cousin?" "Where were you?" Fafnir asked, refusing to answer and remembering a time millennia ago when that question had taunted his knight and those of his Jarl. "Where were you during all this time?" "Out there," replied the black-clad legionnaire, gesturing his axe to the tumultuous skies, "fighting to protect mankind from the legacy of your father's folly. Because someone had to. Someone had to remember the spirit of our oaths, rather than their words." Fafnir laughed weakly at the unspoken accusation, and the sound was utterly without joy. "Tell me, Canyon, if your father had ordered you to do something you knew to be wrong, would you have the strength to defy him? To pit your will against that of your own Primarch?" "Yes," replied Canyon, and in that moment they both knew it was true. "I would." "Then you're a better man than me, cousin," said Fafnir, bitterness dripping from every word. "I can never go against the Wolf King, even when I had my doubts. It is a terrible thing, Canyon, the bond between Primarch and Astartes that the All-Father created. Even now, with Russ gone for more than 10,000 years, the weight of his commands still hangs around my throat. My word is not my own. It has been since the day I was taken from Fenris to join the rout. Go ahead, finish it." Despite all his resolve, Fafnir still flinched as the axe bit deep into his armor and into his chest. He knew that this pain was only the beginning of his torment, a mere prelude to what awaited him on the other side. The claws of the Neverborn would tear his soul apart, and he would suffer for the rest of eternity, slowly descending into madness until pain was all left to him, a just and fair punishment for his sins. He could still see them, forever watching him with eyes full of judgment. Not their own, for they had died knowing nothing but terror and pain. His own judgment, his own self-hatred for all he had done, for the lies he had served, for the innocents he had slain, for the war he still fought, even though he knew it was the wrong thing to do. Yes, Fafnir knew he deserved to burn in the fires of hell for the rest of time, and the circle reserved for traitors. He deserved to burn for the rest of time in the pitiless abyss. Except there was no pain. When darkness closed in, and all senses of his body failed him, there was no burning claw ripping at his spirit. No agony as everything he was became fed for the demons his evil deeds had created. Instead, there was a brief cold, and then there was silence. Crushing all chaos forces in their wake, the Heralds of Prospero finally encountered the elite of the Black Crusade before the walls of their legion's greatest fortress, the original Ahat Yakabi, around which the human city had been built. Even then, the arch-enemy's host vastly outnumbered the Imperial troops. Upon seeing Canyon marching at the head of the heralds, Logan Grimnar was seized by a terrible rage, triggered by ancestral memories that had been passed through his gene seed. Raising high the axe of Morkai, the old wolf called upon the power of Khorne and strode forth to challenge the scourge of wolves. His guards followed him, as did the silent callers and their summoned infernal armies, and some of the Xenos mercenaries he had brought to Terathalion, who had not yet succumbed to the bloodlust and the call of their baser instincts for plunder and carnage. Zahariel and Azrael were content to let their ally deal with the heralds, and instead focused their efforts on breaching the fortress's hollowed walls to reach their true objectives. The two warlords met head to head, neither calling upon his comrades for help. Grimnar carved to claim Canyon's skull and offered it to Khorne, knowing in his heart that such a mighty gift would earn him tremendous rewards, perhaps demonhood itself and freedom from Zahariel's bargain. Canyon saw all of Grimnar's many crimes written into the old wolf's aura, and Vindicta's song was hot and loud in his blood. Grimnar had no remorse, no regret, no doubt. He was the personification of everything Iskandar had ever hated about the 6th Legion. A butcher, blind to the truths of his deeds, preventing the Emperor's gift to perpetuate his hate. Reality bled around Logan Grimnar, demons stepping from his shadows, summoned by the strength of his emotions and bound by the powers at his command. And behind Canyon was the host of the Prosperian dead that had followed him constantly since Agasti's destruction. They came together at last, two champions of powers, old and new. Saren clashed against the axe of Morkai, and the demon bound within Grimnar's weapon roared in frustration, as Vindicta's strength proved its match. From behind their helmets, the two warlords stared at one another, and the air crackled under the strength of their hatred for each other. The heavens above rumbled, and the warp itself shouted their names, for through them too, gods were confronting their will. One was a champion of justice, sought in the name of the innocent dead. The other a servant of war and slaughter for their own sake, without justification or meaning, so long as the blood flowed. "You will die now, little witch," spat Logan Grimnar, his warped helmet twisting his words into barely understandable growl. "Your ghost friends will not save you from my blade, necromancer. It is time to face your sins, son of Russ," replied Canyon, his voice as calm and cold as the void. Something reacted to the clash, some ancient pact suddenly coming due, and a creature shaped like a great Fenrisian wolf emerged from the shadow of Grimnar. Its fur was grey like the smoke of Canyon's burned homeworld. Its fangs glittered with the light of toppled spires. With his powers of perception enhanced by Victa's blessings, Canyon saw through the demon's borrowed form and into its malevolent essence. He recognized it. He had encountered the Neverborn long ago, when he was still an aspirant for the 15th Legion. He had been one of the spirits who had tempted him in the warp's false promises of power and knowledge during his ritual training, whispering half-truths in his young mind while his mentors watched. It had failed to destroy him then. It will not succeed now. Through the efforts of pushing back against Grimnar's strength, Canyon said the demon's name, filling the word with all the anger and sorrow that burned within him. Gyre. The fake wolf stopped midair, caught in his jump by Canyon's telekinetic grip. Its fur began to burn as Vindicta's psychic presence consumed its eldritch essence. Without even looking at the creature, Canyon crushed it in his mental grip, drawing upon the strength of the hundreds of thousands of vengeful spirits bound to his soul. It burst apart in showers of gore and rapidly dissolving soul matter. Its spirit wasn't just banished back to the warp. It was destroyed, obliterated down to the smallest of the emotions he had devoured when Prospero had burned. Logan flinched as the Neverborn's destruction echoed down the sorcerer's connections, pacting him to the creature. Before he could recover, Canyon pressed his advantage. Saren slipped under the old wolf's guard and severed his right hand. The axe of Morkai fell to the ground, the scream of the demon within it causing blood to spurt from the earth in gory fountains. Then his speed increased by the cries of the dead. The scourge of the wolves struck again, and the head of Logan Grimnar flew. The death of the old wolf triggered a terrible frenzy in his Space Wolf allies. Dozens of them were lost to the curse of the Wolfen, while others degenerated into hideous chaos spawns as Khorne's displeasure for his champion's fall spilled over to them. The silent callers cast their masked heads towards the heavens and screamed a sound coming directly from the depths of the Imperium. Their bonds to the one they had followed for so long abruptly severed. The heads of their human cultists burst under the strain, hosts of unbound demons emerging from the gory remains. Lupine abominations born from the nightmares of Prospero survivors who had come to Terathalion millennia ago. Raven-headed creatures that laughed and cackled, telling of dooms to come, and all manners of false spirits that had spawned the Fenrisian legends of yore. The heralds and their living and dead allies fought through berserker wolves and never-born hosts alike, the vengeful ones hunting down the callers with relentless determination. The spectral heralds blinked from one point of the battlefield to another, striking their prey down again and again, driven by the countless horrors the silent callers had committed. The callers wielded greater power than the vengeful ones, but there were 12 of Magnus's undead sons, and only 6 of the Chaos Abominations. Moving like lightning and working together as if directed by a single mind, the vengeful ones always managed to triumph in the end. Every time a caller fell, the mask shattered, and there was a great gust of wind, like the sight of thousands of souls suddenly released from an age-long torment. Finally, when one remained, a towering figure that had once been known as Ezerkan, bane-bearer of the Eightfold Winds, the silent caller performed one last spell and vanished in a flash of warp light. The remains of its brethren dispersed along with it, and the heralds could not help but feel that this wasn't the last the galaxy had seen of the masked Chaos Sorcerer. For all that Grimnar was dead, this did not feel like a complete victory over the forces of evil. More like the vile power that had created the silent callers in the first place had recalled them to its side, to be punished and reforged for their failures. But incomplete as it might be, this victory still took time, and during that delay, the forces of chaos pressed their assault. Callously abandoning the 6th Legion's forces for dead, Zahariel and the Dark Angels attacked the inner walls of Ahat Yakabi, with the Wardens fighting the Chaos Titans of Legio Tempestus. The Ever-Watcher and the Lord of Lies led the assault. The sorcerers of the 1st Legion called upon Discs of Zinj to carry them to the battlements, while squads of raptors rose, leaving trails of eldritch flame behind them. Many of these warriors had once been assault marines of the Dark Angels, but their years of service to Zinj had greatly altered them. Their skulls had fused to their avian helmets, as had the rest of their body to their armor. Any trace of their former humanity had vanished, replaced by vicious predators that took a cruel delight in the hunting of lesser prey. It was even rumored among the creatures of the 1st Legion that those who pleased the God of Change enough in this aspect would end up transformed into Helldrakes, true masters of chaos-touched skies. Considering that such infernal engines usually comes from altered gunships, one shudders to imagine the depths of evil and cruelty to which a warrior must sink in order to earn such a great transformation. With claws dripping with venom or rooted in sorcerous lightning, the raptors fought the defenders of Ahat Yakabi, reaping a bloody toll. When the sorcerers added their dreadful power to the onslaught, even the disciplined forces of the Spire Guard and the Adeptus Mechanicus began to break down. Even the Skitarii warriors of the Martian Empire could be manipulated by the Dark Angels, their programming overwritten by dark forces, and the sacred connection to their priestly masters infected with scrap code and sorcery. And even the Spire Guard, with all their training and experience, were unsettled by the Broken Ones. The lords of the 1st Legion levitated onto the battlements. The daughters of Magnus wept at the sight of their former Imperials. The daughters of Magnus wept at the sight of the former Imperials, their minds and souls shattered by the interrogator chaplains. They can sense the horror of what had been done to them, and the terrible fact that there was no coming back for them. Whatever made humans human was gone from the hallowed shells that remained. Under the onslaught, entire sections of the walls fell to the enemy. With the situation so dire, Maddox took the decision of releasing one of the fortress's most powerful and most dangerous allies. In the days before the Black Crusade's arrival, every Corvides seer on Terathalion had agreed that these were monumentous times, and that the hands of destiny was in motion for all the galaxy. The time had come, they insisted, for the 15th Legion to use every weapon and tool they had accumulated during the long age of the Imperium. Already they roused the wardens of Ahat Yakabi, despite the terrible cost involved. But more was required if the worst was to be avoided. And so Maddox decided to fulfill one of the Imperium's own prophecies. Despite all his misgivings about the War of Fate, fighting on the walls to contain the enemy, he sent his brothers to the depths of Ahat Yakabi. There, they opened the stasis casket of Khalida, the watchful daughter of Magnus. Khalida, watchful daughter. Few know of the truth of Khalida's origins, even among the Order of the Daughters of Magnus. In truth, even the Thousand Sons themselves have limited knowledge to a handful of their own. For more than 4,000 years, her very existence had been nothing more than a legend, whispered by those who pray to Magnus as an avatar of the God Emperor. To them, Khalida is a holy spirit, a living saint, an incarnation of their God's power and will, sent to protect his sons until the day of his awakening. The truth is a bit different, but perhaps not as much as it seems. At the dawn of the 37th millennium, the giant red star of Maxil Beta system went supernova. But the stellar event was tainted by the minions of chaos, resulting in the cosmic cataclysm spreading the touch of ruin upon every world touched by its baleful eye. Its baleful light. Touched by its baleful light. This catastrophe, known as the Wrath of the Chaos Sun, affected dozens of imperial worlds, all of which promptly descended into anarchy and madness as mutation and heresy ran wild. The Imperium reacted swiftly, gathering its terrible might to cleanse the afflicted worlds. Due to the scope of the Chaos infection, the Grey Knights alone would not be enough for the task, and the Thousand Sons sent many of their numbers to the decades-long war of purification. World after world burned in the fires of Exterminatus. The only mercy that could be delivered to the unfortunate souls damned by the Chaos Sun. Always, the process would be the same. The Thousand Sons would descend upon the world, eliminate whatever demon lord or other defense prevented orbital annihilation. Then they would withdraw and watch from their ship as the planet's population was wiped out. This forced a terrible burden upon the conscience of the Sons of Magnus, and soon they began to pray as fervently as any imperial citizen ever had, not for an end to their duty, but for the chance to save someone, anyone at all, from the worlds. And in what the ecclesiarchy would undoubtedly call a miracle, had the circumstances been slightly different, they found one. The name of the world on which the Thousand Sons found Khalida was expunged from all records, along with all others touched by the Chaos Sun, at the Inquisition's command. But the legends tell it was a hive world, covered in towering spires and sprawling metropolises. By the time the Imperial War Machine reached it, it had become another hellish world, filled with twisted, crazed mutants, and the demons that wore their flesh. At first, the Thousand Sons were ready to simply blast it to pieces from orbit. Nothing there, it seems, had the power to warp reality enough to make the planet immune to Exterminatus. But the seer among the group stopped their hand, for he could feel something else on the world. Something that did not belong to chaos. A light in absolute darkness. It did not take much effort to convince his brothers to descend onto the world and try to rescue whatever the source of that light was. And amidst the madness, they found it. A living girl, less than 20 Terran years old, who shone with psychic gold as she knelt before an unsullied icon of the God Emperor. The mutants and demons that stalked the world could not approach her, and there she remained in prayer, unchanging as the years passed. It was only when the seer laid his hand upon her shoulder that she reacted, her eyes widened in wonder at the presence of the Space Marines. From the moment they stepped out of the ruined church where she had taken refuge when the Chaos Sun had flared in the heavens, the Thousand Suns were forced to fight against an unceasing tide of enemies. It seemed that the whole planet was trying to kill them, driven by an undying hatred of the light in their midst. Perhaps the sons of Magnus would later theorize they could not bear the light reminding them of all they had lost. Eventually, the Thousand Suns managed to bring the girl back to their gunship and safely extract. The moment they were all out of the atmosphere, the seer gave the order to begin the exterminatus. Already he could feel the gaze of the dark gods turned towards them, and there was no telling what they would do with a whole planet of servants to call upon. As her home world cracked apart, the young woman who had fallen unconscious the moment the Thousand Suns had removed her from the church woke up. Recognizing the significance of her discovery, the Thousand Suns immediately sent her and the seer, whose visions had led to her towards Terathalion, while the others remained to complete the task at hand. During the journey, the seer learned that the young woman had forgotten nearly all of her memories prior to her time in the church. She only remembered the God Emperor, the words of prayer, and the monsters baying for her soul. Not even her own name had made it through the trial her psychic had undergone. She received the name of Khalida from the seer, a name from old Prosperian legend about a woman who had refused to let even the most grievous of losses stand in the way of what she saw as the righteous path. The seer also found out that Khalida was an Alpha Plus Psyker, one of these exceptionally rare beings who wielded the power of the warp with a degree only surpassed by the Primarch and the Emperor himself. The horror of the Chaos Sun had caused her latent ability to suddenly blossom, which was still in the realm of the seer's expectations. But that she had survived and remained pure on a world overrun by the minions of ruin was something even the secular sons of Magnus could only call a miracle. On Terathalion, Khalida joined the Daughters of Magnus and learned how to wield her tremendous power from them. But the Daughters' teaching had never been meant to be studied by one as powerful as she. The Thousand Suns who knew of her existence feared that for all her devotion to their grandsire, she was too powerful to allow to run loose. Eventually, some claimed the dark gods would find a way to pervert her into their service, and then, with her strength, Terathalion would be doomed. Khalida knew of their concerns and understood them. In truth, she shared them herself. She did not believe herself to be holy, simply protected by the Emperor, but she could still hear the whispers of the ruinous powers, all desperate to turn her. Even Korn, with his famous hatred of Psykers, couldn't pass up such an opportunity. In the end, she volunteered to be placed in stasis, where she would not be able to cause any harm and would be beyond the reach of even the Chaos Gods themselves. With a solemn ceremony designed to ensure that she enters stasis in the correct state of mind, as during stasis the mind lingers on its last thoughts, sometimes the catastrophic effect in the case of long periods. Khalida went to an artificial sleep she hadn't broken for nigh 5,000 years when the Black Crusade reached Terathalion. Yet even in this state, Khalida hasn't been inactive. Somehow, even the Dark Age technology the 15 Legion used for her sanctuary wasn't enough to completely shut off her presence. While the visions of the Crimson King are few and subject to suspicion, no one denies that Khalida's specter had appeared to thousands of pilgrims and devotees over the years. These apparitions bring solace to the tormented praying for spiritual help, delivering the advice and curing sickness and injury. Though the apparition features are never clear, it is always clad in a golden aura described by eyewitnesses as filled with the Emperor's own love. There is a sect of the Imperial Creed in Nahat-Yakabi that worships her as a saint, and it's from this cult that she received the title of Watchful Daughter. Imperial seers have received visions of her throughout the galaxy. Even some of the 8 Legion's prophets have dreamt of the light of Terathalion, though the details are never clear. Golden light burst from the fortress as Khalida emerged from her casket. She already knew of the battle at hand. She had heard the prayers of those calling to the God Emperor for victory and salvation. Like a vengeful angel, she flew to the walls, followed by the 1,000 sons who had awoken her. The Neverborn screamed upon her arrival, and then these screams grew even louder when she let loose the fire of the Emperor's own retribution. For thousands of years, Khalida had been an agent of the God Emperor's benevolence. Now she became a vessel of his wrath. The power that rose the daughter was as potent as ever, and the forces of chaos fell back before her fury as she destroyed hundreds of demons, elite cultists, and chaos marines. The light of her fate and the Crimson King and the God Emperor made her anathema to the warp spawn. Even Zahariel and his coven of Lords of Change were reluctant to approach her, but as long as she stood upon the walls, they could not progress further. Zahariel called upon Tzeentch, begging his divine master for help, and the great deceiver answered. With a cruel smile, Tzeentch reached out and moved the pawn that had been sent to Terathalion in anticipation of that exact moment. For centuries she had remained in prayer, her mind at one with the God Emperor's divinity. She had looked deep into the thoughts of the Master of Mankind in that time, and while none save her, perhaps his son, could truly understand the mind of a true God, she had learned much. She had witnessed the abyss of millennia throughout which she had lived, guiding humanity away from damnation and towards the salvation only he could conceive. She had seen the many sacrifices he had made in the name of that goal, the lives he had destroyed, the hopes and dreams he had broken. She had seen the oceans of blood he had spilled as he pruned the tree of life itself, but she had also seen the tears he had silently shed. She had felt his love for mankind, his drive to protect the species from which he had been born, no matter how removed from it he became. She would keep the tides of chaos at bay, as she had done before. Then the exiled would return, and the Crimson King would rise. She would share the Emperor's vision with his freed son, and together they would bring a new age of peace and illumination to the galaxy. All would proceed according to the God Emperor's design. His light shone through her, and as long as it did, Nahat-Yakabi would not fall, for no spawn of ruin could bear its touch. The fragments of the Chaos Gods fled before her, and those touched by the tainting influence recoiled, struck by a horror they could not comprehend at the light's touch. Even before it began to burn their impure flesh away. And so she stood, and from the walls of Nahat-Yakabi, the wrath of the God Emperor rained down upon those who dared threaten his son. Then one soul approached her, confused and lost, but untouched by darkness. She turned towards it, and her eyes widened as she saw a warrior of the legions, clad in the armor of the Dark Angels. This warrior was stumbling, confusion and shock radiating from his thoughts. He did not know where he was, did not know who she was. Like a lost child, he was reaching out to her, desperately, silently begging for help. The light did not harm him, instead calling him forward. He fell to his knees before the watchful daughter. The dagger buried itself in her heart, and a blood stain spread over her robe. She looked into the eye lenses of her killer. shocked beyond words, unable to understand what had happened. Where before there hadn't been a lost warrior, now there was... where before there had been a lost warrior, now there was a cruel, scheming monster, revealing the success of his vile sorcery. Then, just before oblivion claimed her, she struck back with one last blow, and the deceiver was cast back, crashing onto the rock, dagger slipping from his grasp and shattering as it hit the ground. But it was too late for her, and as Khalida fell, she knew that the Emperor's plan for her had been shattered. "And so dies your pawn, Anathema," laughed the god of change, "and with it your pathetic efforts to challenge my reign over the streams of destiny. I alone am the architect of fate." Khalida's death broke the mortal defenders of Ahat-Yakabi. They saw their saint fall and knew in their souls that all hope was lost. The Dark Angels, for their part, did not appear troubled by the sudden disappearance of their lord. Their complex, many-layered, utterly insane hierarchy meant that each of them still had his own mission, his own commander to obey. They pressed on, and soon the battlements fell. Maddox led the retreat into Ahat-Yakabi's inner corridors, preparing to fight the forces of chaos every step on the way to Magnus's sanctum. As Zahariel entered the fortress, Canyon and the other heralds finally reached the walls. With their power, it was easy for the heralds to levitate, leaving their mortal army to deal with the rabble the Chaos Lord had left behind. Utter anarchy descended as three armies fought within the fortress's corridors. Maddox's control and his forces fell apart, each Thousand Sun forced to fight on his own and with whatever troops he could marshal, protecting their minds against the pervading despair. But despite all the bravery of Terathalion's defenders, they were still losing ground, and the force of chaos drew nearer and nearer to the vast cavern where Magnus's body laid in state. Eventually, Maddox led a desperate last stand at the sanctum's gates, gathering as many of his brothers at his side as he could, hoping that the heralds would manage to break through the chaos horde and reinforce his position. He had heard of the return of his lost brothers during the confusion, and while he barely dared to believe in such miracles, he knew it was his legion's only hope. Before the great adamantium gate, the Undying held his ground, with hundreds of men, women, and Astartes at his side. Where was it? Thousand Sons, Spire Guard, Daughters of Magnus, Mexicanos. Okay, that was funny. Mechanicus Kitari all stood together to defend the Primarch against the legions of darkness. And then, from the hordes of the lost in the dam emerged one warrior, clad in blue-gray armor and radiating the baleful power of Khorne. In his hands, he held the power sword of ancient design, a relic of mankind's distant and glorious past, despoiled and tainted with runes of the blood god. Behind him came other space wolves and wolfen. He wore no helmet, revealing the long fangs and the long black hair that had given him his name. This was Ragnar Blackmane, the young king, thrice-cursed heretic and bane of the Imperium. After the death of Logan Grimnar, he had left the rest of the 6th Legion forces with his own warband, seeking the glory of being the one to breach the sanctum of the Crimson King. Driven by the bloodlust of Khorne, Ragnar identified Maddox as the leader of the defenders and sought to claim his head in single combat. The Wolf Lord was no mindless berserker. There was skill in how he fought, instinct sharp by centuries of war in the name of his hateful god. His accursed blade danced its power field, somehow sounding like the screeches of the damned as it cut through the air. Despite Maddox's efforts, despite having reinforced his body with all powers he could muster, it was all the Undying could do to match the traitor's strength. They had been fighting for several minutes now, and except for a few dents in their armor, neither were the worse for wear. Then the wolf started talking, his voice filled with hatred and disgust. So potent, Maddox could feel them with his six senses. There was such darkness in the traitor's mind, it made him want to heave. "Your witch brother killed Logan Grimnar," growled Blackmane. "I will avenge him with your death." "Vengeance," said Maddox, with as much contempt as he could muster in that word, willingly fanning the flames of his own cold rage in order to retain his focus. "It's all your kind has ever been good for, even though you never noticed that you didn't deserve it. That everything that ever happened to you was brought about by your choices, your actions." Ragnar's only reply was a wordless roar, and then he moved even more quickly than before. Maddox. Okay, I kind of lost that one. I have to find it again. Not his guard, or it was a wordless roar, and then he moved even more quickly than before. Maddox parried a blow at his side with his staff, then turned the weapon in his hands and struck back. He only saw the trap too late. Once his weapon had already been hit by the Space Wolf's right in the chest. Ragnar was smiling. Despite the blood leaking from his wound, he had unwillingly taken the hit, trusting his enhanced physiology and the blasphemous gifts of his patron to keep him in the fight. Already his blade was moving, seizing the minute opening in Maddox's guard caused by his attack. The weapon's touch as it cut right through his armor and into his belly was agonizing. Instinctively, he sent power to close the wound the moment the blade left a portion of his flesh. But something in the injury prevented even the most basic of healing. Gutted, his entrails spilling from his wound, Maddox fell to his knees. Before him, Ragnar raised his blade to deliver the killing blow, only for the sword to be blocked by a weapon that was only partially material. Maddox recognized the ghostly warrior. This was Alep Fiorus, the last Thousand Son to leave for Prospero, heeding the call of its dead. Now he was back, but he was no longer mortal. Instead, one of the ghosts whose voices had driven him to leave his legion. And there were more like him, ethereal Astartes who manifested by the side of Maddox's comrades, standing with them against the minions of ruin. And again, Maddox heard the call, this proclamation of defiance, coming from the minds of each of the 12 ghost champions. "We are returned." Despite the intervention of the Vengeful Ones, Maddox was still terribly wounded. Blackmane's blade was cursed somehow, and his power prevented the Undying from healing the injuries that it had inflicted upon him. And just as he fell back, dragged by his brothers, Zahariel himself appeared in the antechamber, accompanied by his cohort of Lords of Change. The 12 Vengeful Ones gathered to stand against the greater demon, and the air crackled with the energies of the two powers these entities represented. Of the coven, Zahariel had brought with him to Terathalion 8 lords yet remained, making their total 9. An auspicious number of the servants of Tzeentch. The Vengeful Ones were powerful, and each of them still carried the memories of a lifetime of war against the minions of chaos. But they were still new to their extended forms, while the Lords of Change had each existed for thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of years. And while Vindicta was growing more powerful with every passing day, the Architect of Fate had existed far longer, and he was using its hoarded power to reinforce its minions in the most crucial of battle. And the time the Lord of Change would pay for this boon, for Tzeentch was ever fickle, but for now, the will of the changing god was focused on achieving victory on Terathalion. One by one, the Vengeful Ones fell, torn to shreds by claws and sorcery, and the Thousand Suns sensed their essence lost their hold on reality. They weren't destroyed, but instead they were cast into the Empyrean, where their pull of Prospero dragged them back to the world of their death. They would return, in time, reaching out to Vindicta's living agents across the galaxy, but their part in the siege of Terathalion was over. With the last of the vengeful ones banished, the Everwatcher raised his staff in his clawed hands and unleashed his sorcery against the Sanctum's gates. The esoteric symbols engraved upon its adamantium surface flared to life, for none but the sons of Magnus could open them. But Zahariel's might was too great. The Everwatcher was empowered by his deceitful god, acting as the chosen hand of Tzeentch on Terathalion, and eventually the gates fell with a thunderous sound. Behind them was revealed the most well-defended place in all of the Prosperian dominion. The chamber beyond the gates had been carved into the rock beneath Ahat Yakabi, when Magnus had fallen 9,000 years ago. Designed by the greatest architects of the Imperium, it was truly immense, stretching out for kilometers. At the center of the space was a pyramid of white marble, and atop that pyramid was where the slumbering body of the Crimson King rested. But the rest of the chamber was far from empty. Row upon row of figures surrounded it, all turned towards Magnus's comatose form, wearing various patterns of Astartes armor, clutching their bolters that hadn't been fired ever since they had entered this room. These were the rubric. Yeah. I tried to spell it in Latin with an A and an E, but it's like the rubric. Sure. Each of these silent warriors had once been an aspirant of the 15 Legion, promised to a bright future in service of the Imperium. But upon going through the rubric that would protect them from the genetic instability that plagued their bloodline, they had been destroyed, reduced to dust, trapped within a sealed armor. Such was the price of Ahriman's spell exacted from the Legion in return for saving it from the doom laid upon it by the Great Mutator. Tens of thousands of these failed Astartes stood vigil there, utterly immobile, an army of the silent dead that could only be roused by a voice truly powerful. This was the price sought by Zahariel, that the true goal of the Black Crusade. With the ritual of desecration of Magnus's body, the Everwatcher would be able to command the rubric, bringing them to the service of chaos in an unstoppable parody of a legion. Zahariel stepped forward, and the ancient wards of sanctity fought against his presence. With a scowl, the demon recoiled before grabbing the closest of his courtiers and throwing it through the gates. With a screech of agony, the Lord of Change went up in flames, its physical shell consumed by the ward's power. The same happened to the one Zahariel threw next, and the same to the one after, until finally one greater demon survived, reduced to a mewling mass of flesh and warp energy by the now exhausted power of the 15 Legion's spell. By then only Zahariel himself remained, and the Everwatcher laughed as he crossed the threshold of his old foe's sanctuary. Finally, after millennia of planning and scheming, the hour had come for him to claim ultimate victory in the name of Tzeentch, to destroy the Crimson King and the threat he represented to the architect of fate's design, and turn his legacy to the service of the God of Change. But as he walked towards the white pyramid at the chamber's entrance, passing between rows upon rows of silent rubric, a voice rose from behind him, calling out in challenge. Zahariel. The Everwatcher paused, then turned. There, walking towards him with the ruined bodies of the demon servants piled behind him, was Kion the Black, radiating psychic power. Around him, the echoes of Prosperian dead swarmed, their ghostly faces facing Zahariel, their own hatred of him increasing Canyon's already considerable's own, whatever. Slowly, deliberately, Zahariel walked back down the path until he was but a few meters away from the Herald. For a few seconds, the two simply stared at each other, the only sound that of the battle that still raged in the antechamber as the heralds of Prospero fought against the remnants of Zahariel's Black Crusade. "Look at you," mocked the demon as it loomed over Canyon. "Look at how far you have gone, little Iskadar. fighting at the side of your own Neverborn. I am proud of you, really. Of all our father's sons, you are the only one who ever got close to fulfilling his true potential." "Save your lies, demon," spat Canyon. "I know what you intend. I won't let that happen." Zahariel's laughter was a thing of nightmares. It was the sound of hopes becoming true in the most horrible, twisted way, of long-held belief suddenly revealed as naught but superstition. "You cannot defeat me, Iskandar. You are strong for a mortal, but I am so much more than that. The little god you serve is but a fledgling, and I serve a power far greater." "We will see about that," said Canyon, and he charged Zahariel, his axe raised and the winds of death itself screaming at his side. He moved fast, faster than he had ever before, faster than when he had battled Agastrium Prospero. Vindicta's strength flowed through him, for before him stood the arch-enemy of his legion, the creature that was responsible for all the suffering and madness that had happened across Terathalion. In that moment, he was far more than Iskandar Canyon, scourge of the wolves, and first herald of Prospero. Now he was justice incarnate, retribution made flesh. Zahariel's staff met Saren's edge as the ancient power axe shattered in 1,000 pieces, while Canyon was flung back, only to be caught mid-air in the Ever-Watcher's left claw. Despite everything he had endured over the years, Canyon screamed as Zahariel unleashed his power against him, ripping out pieces of his armor and tearing him apart on the inside, until he was but a hair's breadth from death. Blinking tears of pain and blood away, Canyon stared into the eyes of the demon, barely able to keep himself from falling into unconsciousness from the pain and shock. "Do you really think your new power would be a match for me?" sneered Zahariel. "I am a scion of Tzeentch, little mage. I am timeless, and my knowledge stretches beyond your imagining. It will take more than your pathetic tricks to defeat one such as me." With a delusionary gesture, Zahariel threw Canyon across the room. The herald crashed into a wall next to the broken gates and slumped to the ground, where he remained unmoving. "Watch now," mocked the greater demon, "as I bring the retribution of Tzeentch upon your father and claim dominion over all he ever held dear." Then, without another glance, Zahariel turned back towards the White Pyramid, abandoning his defeated foe. Failure tasted of familiar ashes in Canyon's mouth as he laid on the ground, his body broken, his power spent, his axe shattered. He could not move, could barely breathe. He had lost, and there was nothing more that he could do but watch as everything he had fought for was horribly metamorphosized by the evil he had failed to stop. Part of him wondered whether Zahariel would grant him the mercy of death once he had witnessed the terrible vision of Prospero came true. And then there was a presence near him, and he forced himself to turn his head towards it. There stood Maddox, the current leader of the 1,000 Sons defending Terathalion. Canyon had heard of him from the heralds who had most recently left the Legion. The so-called Undying was on the brink of death, his life prevented from ending only by the constant use of his greater powers of biomancy. His aura, weak and flickering, was still threaded with Vindicta's power. Should he survive long enough, he too would become a herald. But that wasn't likely to happen now. "I see it now. Vindicta's light," said Maddox between gritted teeth, and Canyon could hear the blood dripping from his mouth with every word. "It needs you, Canyon. It needs you alive." Maddox knelt by Canyon's side and laid his hands upon his ancient brother's broken body. Power flowed through Iskandar, repairing the tears in his flesh and rejuvenating exhausted muscles. For several seconds, Maddox simply sat there, immobile, working his art to heal Iskandar. And then he fell, and moved no more, the last of his life expended to heal Canyon's wounds. How many brothers had Iskandar seen die now? How many more would he see before it finally ended? Why won't you let me die? He thought bitterly, nearly overcome by the centuries of warfare and horror he had experienced. As the galaxy fell ever further into darkness, how much more could one soul bear before breaking under the strain of so much death? However much was required of him, came the answer from a silent voice in his head. Canyon forced himself to look up, ignoring the pain that caused. There, standing over his own corpse and Carrion's crawling form, was the ghost of Maddox, looking down at the brother he had saved. He did not wear his helmet anymore, and his face held no wrath, no judgment at Canyon's doubts, only trust. Even in death, Maddox believed Canyon would do his duty. How could he disappoint someone who has sacrificed his life to save him? Despite the pain, Maddox had saved his life, but Canyon was still far from fully healed. He crawled towards the pyramid. He did not know what he would do, what he could do, but he would not give up. He would not give in to despair. And so he crawled, centimeter after centimeter. And then, a miracle happened. Zahariel was climbing up the steps of the pyramid, and was already half the way to the top, when, without a warning, a disk of bright light appeared before him, stopping him in his tracks. Canyon recognized the psychic signatures of a warp portal, though the power behind it was unknown to him. A first silhouette emerged from the portal, and Zahariel was nearly content. Then another, smaller figure appeared, and the Everwatcher froze in shock, before screeching in denial and dread. From his position on the ground, Canyon smiled behind his helmet. He knew these two. He knew them both. He had walked at their side in the past, and while their partings had not been peaceful, he knew them both to be enemies of the primordial annihilator. Most importantly, he knew what their coming meant. The circle was closed, and destiny long delayed was in motion once more. The exile had returned.